I'm Roman Yossi of the Nashville Predators.
I'm Matt Duchesne of the Nashville Predators.
I'm Justus Aros of the Nashville Predators.
I'm Ryan Johansson of the Nashville Predators.
You're listening to the Renegades of Puck
with Crazy Charlie.
Welcome to the bunker. Welcome to the Renegades of Puck podcast. I'm your host and Captain Crazy Charlie Saunier. And before we get to the No Half Step in hockey coverage, let me direct you to our home website, renegadesofpuck.com. Once you go to renegadesofpuck.com, you'll get good and educated about the show. And once you are educated about the show, you can click on that merchandise tab. That's going to take you to our classic logo t-shirt, our Pride logo t-shirt, all of our different special event t-shirts, and so much more. All the gimmicks you've come to know and love and expect from the Renegades Puck, all still available in our online store. Socks, throw pillows, wall art, bed sets, so much more. You can outfit your entire person or body if you'd like, and we would appreciate it if you would. We've sold out so that you can buy in. Social media is of critical importance to this independent hockey operation. You can find us on the following platforms: TikTok. You can also find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You can find us on YouTube. Please, thank you for all the recent subscribers, and we would sure love to get some more subscribers, approaching another significant milestone right there on Renegades of Puck TV. The audio podcast can be found on numerous platforms thanks to the Full Press NHL network. The show is now being heard by more Renegades than ever, so just search your preferred platform, Renegades of Puck, or check out Google, Spotify, Stitcher, or several others that you can see there on the screen. Venmo is how you can become a sponsor of the show or make a donation. As you can see, throughout the best of episodes that we have had so far, we have made significant upgrades, both on camera and behind the scenes in our technology, and that's thanks to generous Renegades just like you. So scan the QR code that's currently on your screen, or just search Renegades of Puck in Venmo. Again, thank you. Stick taps, love, and respect. It sure does mean a lot to us. Now, I know it's time to get to the No Half Step in hockey coverage, so let me deliver the goods. It's time for operation number 749. That's right, time for show number 749. And at this moment in hockey history, we're talking all things Bryan Bastin. He's got the charts you need to see, the numbers you need to know. He runs the Renegade Analytics desk, and he does so much more. It's the best of Bryan Bastin from ontheforecheck.com, and I'd like to tee up the introduction and get you started on the episode. Bryan's been with the show for about 300 episodes now and has been incredible. I found Bryan on the internet fighting about statistics and a whole bunch of other issues, and I loved it from the second I first saw it. I reached out, I recruited, and I brought Bryan into the trenches, and I am so thankful that I have done so. He's one of the Renegades of Puck, and he's always welcome here in the bunker, and he'll always have a place here in the trenches. Here he is, the one and only Bryan Bastin. Bryan, time to bring the jam.
Nashville Predators returned home after a long and grueling 12-game road trip, and their first game back in the Bridgestone Arena was a 2-1 victory over the Detroit Red Wings. Now, after the victory, Nashville does sit just 4 points back with 3 games in hand out of a playoff spot behind the Winnipeg Jets, who they will be, coincidentally, playing on Saturday. But one of the things about this game, if you might have seen it, is that, well, it was pretty ugly. Nashville was on top of things for the most part defensively. They looked pretty calm and in control when they were in their own defensive zone, but on offense they just couldn't get anything going. But yet they still were able to manage and create enough opportunities to get those 2 goals, and that was enough to beat the Red Wings. But I think one of the most underrated things that we saw tonight was the performance of the penalty kill. In fact, it wasn't just the performance of the penalty kill itself. You've heard me, during the game talk a lot about what Jeremy Lauzon did, who he did have an excellent game, especially defensively. But there's one player that I want to highlight, and it's not just because of tonight, because if you look at the stats for tonight, it doesn't seem like it's that great, but let's talk about one guy who has really been driving this penalty kill, and that guy is going to be the topic of tonight's one big stat. Cole Smith. Yes, there has been a lot said about him. Probably wondering where a lot of it's coming from, but since things have changed and we've gotten into rebuilding mode after the trade deadline, the online fervor about Cole Smith and his plays on this roster has seemed to die down a little bit. But it may not just be because we're overwhelmed with all kinds of other news. It's because Cole Smith has been playing pretty well. Now, obviously, still struggling to get on the score sheet, but I think that his biggest role that he's been doing great at has been on the penalty kill. Now, we've seen all year, especially recently with this recent stretch of penalty kill success, where Cole Smith and Yakov Trenin are creating a lot of opportunities. Cole Smith is great at creating those turnovers or blocking shots that get the puck to their teammates to be able to actually have a counterattack. But on the season, nobody has more shot attempts than Cole Smith. He added his 16th shot attempt of shorthanded of the season, which he leads all of his teammates in that, as well as 9 shots on goal, which ties him with Yakov Trenin. And this is, he's been a guy that can actually be fairly reliable. Coach Hines talked a lot about the trust that he has in him to play him along Colton Sissons tonight, adding that, they trust him so much that they are able to get him out with the first penalty kill unit, bring him back in for a break, and have him out there double shifted towards the last 30-40 seconds of the penalty kill. And that's worked all night long and for the last handful of games. So something is obviously working. Obviously, we really do want to see more goals from Smith, but he's playing exceedingly well on a team that, let's face it, isn't playing a whole lot of defense, and he's doing a pretty good job. And not just defense, though, he is also taking care of the puck. He averages about 2.3 takeaways per 60 minutes and just under 1 giveaway under 60 seconds. So that's a pretty good turnover ratio, no matter how you want to appeal that. So, again, Cole Smith, you have played a really valid role in this team, and a lot of the success that we've seen with this penalty kill, yes, some of it is UC Saros, some of it is Jeremy Lazon, but Cole Smith has played a very, very strong part in it. And sometimes the best way to play on the penalty kill is by having the puck and trying to score yourself. So Cole Smith, hopefully he can continue this role, and the penalty kill can continue to be as good as it has been. And that's tonight's one big stat.
As you may have seen in the clip just now, this team probably doesn't want to talk about the night that Eeli Tolvanen had in his second game and his return to Smashville since being waived earlier this year. And despite, being pretty much blanked in the first game, Eeli Tolvanen had his revenge game in a pretty big way with 2 goals on the night and just a stunning performance overall. So again, if the coaches or the staff don't want to talk about him, well, I sure as hell am. So let's talk about Eeli Tolvanen in tonight's one big stat. Now, ever since he was waived, it's been a bit of a sore spot. Whether you're a person who believes that John Hines should be fired into the sun, or you're somebody who defends the guy, I think both sides can probably agree that absolutely nobody was happy with the way the Eeli Tolvanen situation was handled, even before he was waived and claimed by the Seattle Kraken. Obviously, we saw him appear in just 13 games this year with 2 goals and 4 points in just those 13 games. But Eeli Tolvanen has long been a story of somebody not realizing what his potential has been. We all heard after he was drafted that he was a one-trick pony, that he was, junior Ovechkin, and all he was a hard shot. And over the next couple of years, Eeli Tolvanen worked extremely hard to correct that misperception. And by the time this season had started, Eeli Tolvanen had become a regular starter in the lineup, somebody who had excelled on defense and offense. And the only thing really that was going against him was, ironically, his ability to score goals. But when you look at the team here in Nashville and you look at a lot of players who have been stuck on scoreless streaks, I can't say that problem was something that was unique to Tolvanen. And then he was taken and claimed by the Seattle Kraken. Now, before I tell you about his season so far with the Kraken, I want to talk about Eeli Tolvanen and the seasons he's had in Nashville. And we're going to start with the 2020 season, where he first got his major action in the NHL. In 2021, Tolvanen had 40 games, and in those 40 games, he scored 11 goals and 22 points. The next season, 2021-22, he had 75 games played, which was impressive. Again, only 11 goals and 23 points, which at the time was a career high. And I've already talked about this season, his 13 games with Nashville, 2 goals, just 4 points overall. But what he's done since he landed in Seattle is pretty incredible. Eeli Tolvanen is having a career season with career highs in goals and points. But here's a fun fact. You take away those points and goals he scored for Nashville, and he's still having a career season. In 38 games so far with the Seattle Kraken, Eeli Tolvanen now has 15 goals and 25 points, both career highs, and he is showcasing what made him such a dangerous scorer before he was drafted. Now, I know that it's rough to watch this. Many people, myself included, were huge Eeli Tolvanen fans, and I saw him over the years work really hard on all aspects of his game, and I felt that he had earned his way into a place to stay with this lineup. In fact, can you imagine with this current roster and the way that it looks, I think this would have been an excellent time for Eeli Tolvanen to step up, take a more veteran leadership role with the team, or what's left of it right now, and he could have been a really good centerpiece to start this rebuild. But unfortunately, there's nothing we can do about it now, and I'm sure that this is going to be a decision that won't haunt Nashville Predators fans for many years to come. But if it does, let's all say this. We can all be mad at the Predators. We can be mad at coaches or the GM or whoever you want to be angry at. But, I'm actually pretty happy today. Yes, the game was awful, but Eeli Tolvanen deserved every bit of what he felt tonight after scoring those 2 goals. To walk back into this building just a few months after he was released from the team and to come in, score 2 goals, and put the game out of reach for the Nashville Predators. So good on you, Tolvanen. I'm glad that you got what you needed. I'm glad you got a little bit of closure, I guess, on your Nashville saga, your story with the Nashville Predators. And hopefully, maybe, Eeli, just take it a little easy next time on us Predators fans. And that's tonight's One Big Stat.
I'm Bryan Bastin here at the Renegade Analytics Desk, and your Nashville Predators have won. In fact, they've won 2 in a row. After a game that was unnecessarily close between Vancouver a couple days ago, Nashville showed up to play San Jose, and through 2 periods, it looked kind of evenly matched, even if it wasn't on the scoreboard. But in the 3rd period, the Nashville Predators found that offense and exploded en route to a 6-2 victory. Now, Nashville has looked pretty good as of late on offense, scoring 5 goals against Vancouver, 7 goals against Florida. But does this team have what it takes to make it to the playoffs? Now, I know, and most of the people that you probably have heard or read don't think that's possible, and the chances are, let's just be honest, pretty slim. But what does Nashville have coming up ahead of them? And can Nashville survive that run to end the season and make a push into the playoffs? The playoff push is the topic of tonight's One Big Stat. So, Nashville has 26 games left in this season, and these 2 halves of the rest of the season are not created equal. So let's take a look. In the next 13 games for the Nashville Predators, they are playing opponents in which they are 12-2-4 against this season. That is a points percentage of about 78%, which is pretty good. Now, at that rate, over the next 13 games, so if over the next 13 games they continue to win get about 78% of the points, that's about a rate of 20 points over the next 13 games, which is good. 20 out of 26, that's excellent. But what about the last 13? Boy, it's a scary sight. Nashville, this is the run of teams that Nashville will play in the last 13 games of the season when they are trying to make their playoff push. 2 games at home against Seattle, a playoff team. A game at home against Toronto, a playoff team. Then they travel at Boston, a playoff team. At Pittsburgh, St. Louis at home. At Dallas, playoff team. Vegas, playoff team. Carolina, playoff team. Winnipeg, at Calgary, Minnesota, and Colorado. That's quite the murderer's run. Now, that is basically, they have gone 6-12-4 against those 13 teams. That's a 41% points percentage. So at that rate, if they do that same performance, that's 11 points. Now, again, I talked about playoff teams. Those first 10 games, Nashville has 2 games against teams that are currently in playoff position. The LA Kings, which they are 1-0-1 against this season, and the Rangers, which oddly enough, they're 1-0-0. In the second half of this rest of the season, though, it's pretty dangerous. They have got 10 games. 10 out of 13 games are against current playoff teams, and a lot of these teams aren't bubble teams. These are guys who are leading their division. So if we look at that, so Nashville, if they can swing those same percentages, so if they can do about 78% in these next 3 games and then just 41% in the last 13, that projects them for 31 points, thereabouts, which in addition to their 62 they've got right now, that would put them at 93 points, which feels odd because it doesn't feel like they'd be able to get there. But remember, 31 points and they've got 52 outstanding. So they've got to be pretty good, and they've got to be better than what they are right now, which is mediocre. 93 points would be their projected total. But last season, they had 97 and made the playoffs. Now, should they have made the playoffs last season? Maybe. But the West is a little bit more of a kind of a toss-up this year, not compared to the East where everything seems like it's locked down. And I don't know. I seem to think 31 points out of the next 52 kind of seems unreachable. And if anything's going to stop that and make me true, it's going to be those last 13 games. Now, again, this is also assuming that they can get 78% of those points against the next 13 against teams like Arizona, Pittsburgh, Florida again, They've got at Detroit, or they go to Detroit. They've got Winnipeg. I mean, these are games that are not going to be easy. And so it's not looking great. Now, we can say, these are the records, this is what's good. But when you have to finish the season playing 10 teams that are in the playoffs right now, they're all going to be probably jockeying for position in the playoffs too. I don't think there's going to be a lot with the way the West is. There's a lot of teams that are really going to be resting starters towards the end of the year. So Nashville has to figure something out. There's no Philip Forsberg. There's no Ryan Johansson. There's no Alex Carrier. And right now, we don't know if there's going to be a Juuso Parssinen. This team is struggling, and they are getting injured at the worst possible time. But hey, take solace in the fact that if you are a fan of tanking and rebuilding this team, those last 13 games are just what the doctor ordered for you. But as always, we don't want them to lose. We don't want to hope for them to lose. So go Predators. But I have a feeling that the playoffs may be kind of a dream for the Nashville Predators. And that's the topic of tonight's One Big Stat.
I'm here at Bridgestone Arena, and ahead of the Predators being about to embark on a brutal road trip where they'll play 5 games in 8 days, including 2 sets of back-to-backs. First they had to take care of business against one of the worst teams in the NHL, the Montreal Canadiens. And Nashville, for once, was actually able to easily answer that bell. And why you can point to the improved play of UC Saros, Philip Forsberg reawakening back to his usual self ahead of February, or the rise in depth scoring. But no matter what reason we can think of, one thing remains true. The offense feels like it's finally starting to click, and that's the topic of tonight's One Big Stat. The Nashville Predators have now scored a whopping 14 goals in their last 3 games. Prior to those 3 games, the Predators were averaging just 2.5 goals per game, but now average over 4.6 goals a game over the last 3. But how good was it for Nashville to follow up that OT loss in Vegas with an offensive outburst like this? This is just the second time since the beginning of 2022 that Nashville has scored 12 points in consecutive games. It hasn't been since Twin 6-3 wins over Toronto at home and the Ducks in Anaheim back in late March of the last year that the Predators have been able to string together that many goals in back-to-back games. Now, while it's true that 12 of the 14 goals in the last 3 games came against basement-dwelling teams like Montreal and Chicago, this is still a promising sign for Nashville. Tonight was the 4th straight game that the Predators had double-digit high-danger chances. In fact, they've had 10 or more of those chances in 7 of their last 10, a pretty obvious reason why the Preds have been able to suddenly find the net. Now, the Predators will have to keep up their scoring now that UC Saros is back to form with the road trip ahead, and it doesn't have to look so treacherous that they can keep playing like this, but only time can tell. So let's hope that the Predators get back to Bridgestone late next week with a few more games in the win column when they return. And that's tonight's One Big Stat. Another game and another disappointing loss for the Nashville Predators, this time being shut out by Jordan Binnington and the St. Louis Blues in a game that Nashville really needed to have. The rest of this calendar year is not going to be kind for Nashville, and right now I can only see maybe 3 or 4 points realistically for Nashville in the rest of these games, as they've got Edmonton tomorrow, Colorado a couple more times. I mean, there's very good teams on the docket, and this Predators team does not look prepared for any of them at all. So let's talk about, we've talked about this game a little bit. I have one big stat for just this one game, and we'll talk about Juuso Parssinen. He had an excellent game. He had more expected goals than anybody on either side of the ice with .74, which is extremely good, with 5 scoring chances and 4 high danger chances. So Juuso Parssinen had a great game. He created 2 rebounds as well, which is excellent. Hopefully we'll see more out of him. But we're talking about this team, and this game was just, we saw what it was. It was rough, but it was bad because of offense. It was bad for a lot of reasons, and we're going to talk about those reasons in the large scale of things, because it's time for even me, the guy who tries to find a reason to look on the bright side of things, to talk about the mismanagement of this team so far this season by John Hynes and the Nashville front office. So let's get into that. Now, there's a lot of things about this team that don't add up, as many of you can see. You guys have watched the games, you can see it. There's a lot of things, but I want to kind of talk about a few of these things. And all of these either relate to either coaching or asset management by General Manager David Poile. So let's talk about one that
has stuck in my craw a little bit this season. It may not have necessarily much to do with this until later, but let's talk about the myth of the Nashville is coming off of a long break between games. It plays a little rustier. Let's talk about that. So, this season, the Nashville Predators have played 5 games where they have had 3 or more days between games. So we're going to count the season opener against San Jose, since there's a lot of days. But there are also 4 more games in which they had 3 or more games of a break. In those games, the Predators are 3-2-0, so that's actually pretty good. They've got a 60% point percentage. However, you would think that this is a team that has had 4 days break. They've had extra time to be coached up. They can game plan a little bit more for the following opponent. Their power play percentage in those 5 games is just 6.7 attempts, averaging 3 opportunities a game, 6.7 on the power play. Just indescribably bad. Also on the penalty kill, 69%, which is not nice at all, and it is the worst of all those games over this stretch. Now, as we move down, we start looking at these games where there's less and less time. Now here's where you would see that myth of, well, if this team, it hasn't played for a long time, they play a little rustier, but they play better once they get into the swing of things. So let's talk about when they've had 1 or 2 games in between, 1 or 2 days between games. So with 2 games I'm getting all mixed up. With 2 days between games, they've played 4 of those games, and in those games they are 1-2-1. Obviously not great. But they do average a 21% on the power play there and an 85% on the penalty kill. So that's something, but that's only a handful of games. Now, for the most of these games are 15 of them. 15 out of all the games in Nashville has played have been games where there's only been a single day of rest. Now, this team is 6-7-2 in those games. Again, they've had less time, so if they're more rusty when they've had a lot of time off, then they should be better, which they're not. They're obviously not. The power play is 15%, which is worse than what their season average is, which is still awful. Penalty kills at 78%, also not great. But then you look, oddly enough, they've had 2 games where they've come off 0 days rest. So 2 games on the back end of a back-to-back, and hey, they're undefeated, 2-0, 33% on the power play on 6 total chances. So yeah, that's pretty good. But if you still look at this, though, it tells you one thing. One, that having the extra time doesn't seem to be really the case for why this team plays badly. In 5 of those games, they 3-2, but they were awful on the power play, meaning if they didn't have all that time to practice the game plan for that specific opponent's penalty kill style and to work on the power play, all that extra time, you can spend a ton of it in practice. That points to a coaching thing for me. So let's move on a little bit. Now, on this team, we've talked about how badly the team has struggled on offense. I mean, it's god-awful. They are right now 31st in the NHL in goals for. 31st. Not good at all. But let's talk about what they have on this team. Now, oddly enough, if looking at the breakdown of the team, if you look at every single player who has played for the Predators this season, and let me pull that one right up. Yes, if you look at every single one where these players have been have played this season, Nashville has had 8 players on this team that were drafted by them. 4 forwards, 4 defensemen. Now, out of those 8 players, 4 of them are forwards. Those 4 forwards are Colton Sissons, Juuso Parssinen, Yakov Trenin, and of course the other forward that has played that was a draftee was Eeli Tolvanen. And those guys represent just 10 goals by those 4 Nashville draftees. And on defense, obviously, is where it gets a little bit better. You have Josi, Ekholm, Fabro. And Carrier, all drafted. And those guys represent 8 of those goals. So 18 goals by drafted players on this team, by the 8 drafted players out of 66 total goals. So that's only 27%. Now you look at, for the draftees, if you look at the points, out of 168 total points this team has scored so far this season, only 29% of them have been scored by players that were drafted by the Predators. That's just That's just 49 points. So that's not good. Looking at free agents, the story's a little bit different. Obviously, they've got 18 players they've signed as free agents that have played this season. 25 out of the 27 goals scored by free agents were by the forwards. On defense, just two goals. For points, 53 of those 53 points were scored by the forwards, just 3 by defensemen. So that represents 38% of all the goals and 32% of all the points. Now again, think about this now. Yes, there are more players that came in as free agents, but a lot of these guys came as free agents, came in at like Mark Borowiecki, Zach Sanford, Kiefer Sherwood, Roland McCown, Kevin Gravel. Like those guys are ones that were signed, that were signed as free agents, and those guys don't have a ton of goals. So all this is being done really just by a handful of guys that are forwards that were free agents, namely Nino Niederreiter, Matt Duchene. So next, we look at the players that come over in trades. That's 7 players. So that's the least amount on this team. There were 8 draftees, 11 free agents. 23 goals were by players that were traded to the Nashville Predators, which is 35%. And 68 points by players that were traded. So that's 68. That's 41%. So breaking this down, I know I broke this. I talked a lot about this and went into some detail. But for goals, 73% of the goals from this team all come from players that weren't drafted by the Nashville Predators. And as for points, it's 73% or 72% of the points scored by Nashville players this season are by players that were not drafted by Nashville. Because remember, the guys that come in here, like Forsberg, he's technically a trade. But we look at the talent level on this team, and there have been 8 first round players, which is Forsberg, Duchene, Granlund, Johansson, Niederreiter, Cody Glass, Mark Jankowski, Dante Fabro, Michael McCarron, Ryan McDonough, Ellie Tolvanen. That's a lot of guys. I mean, that's 9 players that are first round talents that have played on this team so far. 9 of them, of those draftees, like they're all first round talents that either were drafted by Nashville or came to Nashville by a trade or free agency. And of course, they're the ones carrying the load. But you would think that a team with this many former first round players would be doing a little bit better. But right now, all the heavy lifting is being done by those top 2 lines. Which, if you look at those top 2 lines tonight, the only player in the top 6 that wasn't a first round pick was Colton Sissons, who was a second round pick, and they came up with pretty much nothing. In fact, the most successful line tonight was the line of Tanner Jeannot, Juuso Parssinen, and Yakov Trenin. Jeannot, as we know, was undrafted, Parssinen a 7th rounder, and Yakov Trenin a 2nd rounder. So that's where the production came from tonight for the Nashville Predators, or from those guys that came from the 7th, undrafted, or the 2nd round, which is not a great look. But let's move on some more. So again, 29th on the power play. Inexcusable. There is 0 movement on the power play on this team. It is not like the injuries have caused any issues with the power play. All the injuries so far, for the most part, have been limited to defensemen who are not playing on the power play. So they don't have the excuse of not having the right guys or not having the best players for it. They've got the best players out there on the power play. There's no movement. There's no deception. Everything is perimeter passing, maybe with a bumper, with Matt Duchene at the bumper position. But it's surprising it's not surprising at all that they only have 15 goals on the power play. And I imagine a large amount of those are shots that were taken by Roman Josi or somebody from the perimeter that were deflected or tipped in. So they're not taking high percentage shots, and it's showing. Again, this is a coaching thing. How long did it take for Peter Laviolette's power play to look so bad before they finally made some changes on the coaching staff? That might have to be done sooner rather than later. On the penalty kill, yes, injuries have caused some issues. Those defensemen that have been injured were big mainstays on the penalty kill, but still 18th on the penalty kill. That's not helping your goaltender out at all. Again, let's move on some more. Just a few more things before we go about these coaching. Nashville is 29th in second period goals and 31st in third period goals. This team does not know how to handle the adversity when it comes later in the game. They don't know how to rally to score enough points to outgun these teams. A lot of these times these guys go up against these teams, and as soon as the other team gets 3 goals, it's almost an automatic loss for Nashville. I think they only have like three or four wins this entire season where the opponent scored 3 goals. Another thing against coaching, when they're trailing at the end of the first or second period, they're 5-14-0. This team has very little ability to be able to come back from a deficit. And that goes to coaching. What are these players doing? They're playing different. They're not playing conservative. By these points, if they are 5-14-0 when they're trailing, they should be playing more aggressive, and it's not working. They're tied for 3rd in the NHL in bench minors with 6 bench minors, all for too many men on the ice, which came at some pretty costly times in the last few games that we saw. Again, this is purely a coaching thing. Yeah, discipline, you could say that the player's been doing, but this is something that the coaching should be doing a much better job at fixing. And again, talking about this team's inability to be able to come back from a deficit, they are 3-7-1 when they're trailing first in the game. So when the opponent scores first, they've lost 8 times out of the 12 times that's happened. It's all these things and many, many more just point to a lot of failures. Obviously, you look at the makeup of the team and what the production's going. You talk about the mismanagement, utter and total mismanagement of players like Philip Tomasino and now the departed Eeli Tolvanen, a former first-round pick. And it's hard to point at anything other than coaching and the front office decisions. Yes, the players aren't doing good, but all these players that had extremely great years last year were also had shooting percentages which were way above their career average. So obviously, you had to expect that at least some of these guys were going to come back down to earth, and unfortunately, almost all of them have. But if you look at this, these guys that have come in, Nashville can't develop anybody at forward. They can't develop scoring talent at forward, period. I mean, Juuso Parssinen has 3 goals, and he was a 7th-round pick. He's the newest rookie on the team, and he's got 3 of those goals. It's not great. It's not a great look by the player, the GM that's drafting these players. And then John Hines, when he gets a hold of these young players, we've seen these young players be the ones that have been punished the most in the lineup. You don't see any scratches by guys like Colton Sissons or Ryan Johansson or anybody else who's having a rough game that's a veteran. It's only those rookies. It's all those guys that have come in and played 2 or 3 games, or guys like Tolvanen and Tomasino. They haven't gotten a chance, but some of the veterans who have been around longer, who aren't performing as well as they should at all, are still getting way more chances. And honestly, we're getting to the point where Cole Smith, it's almost like a credit to the fact that he's a younger player that's gotten more time, because he hasn't contributed any goals so far, but it's getting hard pressed to find more than 2 or 3 guys on the Nashville Predators team that are playing better recently than he is, and which just shows how bad this team has looked. This team is not built for the playoffs. This team is not built to be buyers at the deadline. This team is not built to do anything other than look forward to possibly getting a lottery pick. And if that's the way that goes, then maybe it's a good thing in hindsight as we look back on it 2, 3, 4 years ago. They're a lottery pick. That means that they were truly a bad team. Changes probably had to happen, and will finally kickstart the Nashville Predators into finally admitting that they need to rebuild. Yes, they've got a lot of great pieces. They've got a great core, and they've got guys they really can't move. But what they're doing right now is not working. And at this point, with this team and the way that they're playing, I'm not sure even a Barry Trotz could come in here and turn this around. But I think if there's one reason that this team could turn around right now, it might have to be coaching, whether that be assistants for the special teams, whether that's head coaching, or maybe even with the removal of David Poile as general manager. Bill Haslam met with the board of executives today to talk about future majority owner, and I can't believe that that's not a coincidence given the news with Eeli Tolvanen claimed by Seattle. I think there's a lot of change coming. We've said that a few times over the last few years. We said that in the last few years of Peter Laviolette's tenure. It's not been great. Something's going to happen. I've never been more positive that something is going to happen before the end of this season, because right now this team is frankly an embarrassment. And I know I went on for a while, Charlie, but I'm going to hand this back to you, because you know what? I'm like a lot of Predators fans. I'm real tired of watching this team.
There's not much good to say about the game we just watched, a 7-0 loss to the New York Rangers with an absolutely decimated roster for the Nashville Predators. So instead of the usual statistics-based one big stat, I want to do something a little different, and I ask you to bear with me. Tonight, I am, and maybe indirectly, going to be the topic of this episode's one big stat. Now, before we start, I want to say a couple of things. First off, please forgive me if I do a little bit more reading from my script than usual. This topic is pretty important to me, and I want to make sure I get it right. And second, I promise it's not just me telling a story about myself. There's a point to all of it. So without further ado, let's get started. Last week, after the Predators had defeated the Red Wings, I got to speak with several Nashville Predators in the locker room, just like I normally do, but one of them stuck out to me more than most. I was standing there, microphone in hand, talking to Kiefer Sherwood, and something kept just sticking in my head. What was it about Kiefer Sherwood that seemed different to me? I mean, I've had the chance to talk to 30, 40 NHL players so far in my career, but something was different about Kiefer Sherwood, and it stuck with me all night long. But then on the way home, I remembered something that I'd learned about him earlier this season when he debuted, and everything started to click. Kiefer Sherwood is half Japanese. And outside of his hair being much better than mine, being a few inches taller, and much better at pretty much everything sports related, I was struck with a feeling that I had never had in nearly 4 years of covering the NHL. I was talking to a player that looked just like me. My dad, as well as my uncle, were both born in Japan and placed in an orphanage very early in their lives, and my grandparents adopted them. My grandparents at the time were stationed in Japan as part of the U.S. Navy, and after a short stint in the Pacific and a couple other places, they eventually moved back to West Tennessee, where all of my family comes from and where my dad grew up. Now, I'll be honest with you. Yes, technically I am a minority, but I feel pretty privileged when I say I've never once faced any prejudice because of it. And yes, part of it is because a lot of people just look at me with a slightly confused look on their face and go, what are you? Because they don't know what my ethnicity is, but I can't say that once in my life have I been held back for something because of it. But I also know that I am very lucky to be able to say something like that. So why am I telling you this story? Of course, I still have to give you my one big stat for the night, and tonight's one big stat is 31. 31 is the number of Asian American players who have ever played an NHL game. From Larry Kwong, who was the very first and deserves to be in the NHL Hall of Fame, all the way to Kiefer Sherwood, there are more teams currently in the NHL than players who look like me that have ever played a game in the NHL. Of course, Paul Kariya holds a special place in most hockey fans' heart, of course, but it's always been a dream of mine to meet him for the very reason I've been talking about tonight. Again, you might be wondering, why am I telling this story? Representation matters. Not just to future generations or marginalized groups, but even a 36-year-old beat writer with 2 kids who have lived a pretty lucky life. There's nothing I can say to explain what it meant to me when I got to speak to Kiefer Sherwood that night, nor when I talked to him after practice the next day about this very topic. Part of it, I guess, is hope. Hope that one day that number will be much larger than 31. And yes, I don't harbor any illusions of, well, if Sherwood can be in the NHL, so could I. But until that moment, it was the first time in 36 years that I got to see a professional sports player on my favorite team whose background was just like mine. And everybody should get to experience that feeling. Everyone, without exception. Again, I'm incredibly lucky that I get to speak to these guys after every home game, but even the fans in the stands can feel a kinship with the greatest sport on earth if there's a player out on the ice that reflects who they are as a person. Now, I'm not going to say anything more about James Reimer and the Sharks or any of the similar events that have happened this season. If you're watching this, chances are you already know my thoughts on it. But situations like that are why things like this matter. There are half Japanese hockey fans. There are female hockey fans. There are fans of hockey who are veterans. There are gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgendered, and other queer hockey fans out there. And every single one of them deserves to feel the way I felt standing in that locker room that night. Because sports has done one thing since they were invented, and that's to bring people together around a common interest. If you disagree with me on this, well, there's nothing I can do about it. But it's my hope that there are far more of you that agree with me than not. I want to close this out by saying something directly to you, Renegades. Since day one of working with Charlie, I have felt welcome and supported. Same with anyone who has worked with him. Same with the staff at On the Forecheck. I've been welcomed into the Predators press corps despite being a hockey writer with no formal journalism training. I want you all to live your lives to help others feel the same way. Reach out to somebody and welcome them to the game of hockey. Show them the love and passion that you have for this game and allow them to experience it too. I don't care what color, orientation, or other status they may identify as, because we're all human beings. Renegades, I challenge you to be welcoming to all of those people who cross your path, because you never know when something simple like a routine post-game interview could turn into something that means so much to a person, and in that case, it was me. Hockey has been the reason I've held on. I've met so many wonderful people in my life. Hockey has been a place where I felt welcome in some of the darkest times of my life. Back in 2020, when I was suffering from pretty severe depression, hockey was the lifeline that I could hold on to because I loved the sport, but more than that, I loved the people, and it was a loving community that welcomed me in. And every single person in this world deserves the same feeling. So thank you all, Renegades, for listening to this. It's easy to feel anger, disappointment, or many other negative emotions at the state of the NHL right now, but there is always room for love, happiness, and inclusion, no matter what happens on the ice. Hockey brings people together, and I challenge you, Renegades, to be part of that positive force that welcomes people in without telling them that they don't belong. Because even though the NHL says it and probably doesn't mean it, hockey truly is for everyone, and I refuse to believe otherwise.